All right, we're back. So you should have just gone through the Lenin Russian Revolution leading to the formation of the USSR after the Russian Civil War. Should have went through the PowerPoint and then the video of me explaining all of that material for you. I apologize about the length of that video, but there's a lot to know. So anyways, yeah, I want to go through the questions about Lenin and the Russian Revolution. Basically, a quick recap of the PowerPoint that you would have went through. So let's get on it. So number one says outline the failures of feudal Russia that led to the rise of Lenin and the Bolsheviks. Basically, like what was going on in Russia that caused the people of Russia to decide that they need to go a different direction. So a couple of things. Number one, the weather was very, very bad in Russia, and it was leading to successive poor harvests, and that ultimately led to hungry people. Hungry people become angry people. Next, most of Europe by the mid-1800s, I mentioned before, we had to break off and deliver content this way. 1848 was a year of mass revolution across Europe. And by, the early 1900s, most of Europe, most of the world had moved towards liberal democracy. Yet here we are in Russia, led by a czar, by an absolute autocrat. And people of Russia weren't too happy about that either. In the video, I forgot to mention this, but there was something called the Bloody Sunday incident of 1905, right? You should have hopefully watched that video. The people are starving. They want to appeal to their czar to have some sort of help given to them, right? They think, this is the guy who leads us. He's going to be the one who's able to make our lives better. But instead of actually meeting them and talking to them and helping them, what the czar did is he sent out his imperial guard and he had them slaughtered. So that didn't help. What else? Oh, yeah, World War One. World War One was kicking Russia's ass, to put it bluntly. And Russians wanted out. They wanted out. So when you combine the starvation situation with the lack of freedom, the lack of liberalism, right? It's the early 1900s. Most of the world had gone down the road towards liberal democracy and representative government. You combine that with also World War One, it's just the perfect soup of discontent, which ultimately led to Tsar Nicholas and his family being tossed out. Now, number two, explain what the Constituent Assembly was. Why did Lenin ban it? What did this mean for Russia? Constituent Assembly, it was originally promised by Kerensky, and then Lenin, once he took over power, didn't ban it, decided to have the elections for it. The elections happened, and the Bolsheviks received very little support. So why did he ban it? He banned it because the vote didn't go his way. The election didn't fall into the favor of the Bolsheviks. And most importantly, guys, and this is the big part here, the importance of it is this basically ushered in Russia as a single-party communist state. And this lasts from 1917 until 1991. Yes, I was alive then. We talk about the good old days, right? So yeah, this political structure, this single-party Bolshevik state, remained for 74 years, right? 1917 to 1991 was 74 years. And it was actually inconceivable to have it actually fall at that time. Now, number three, in Russia under Lenin, fear and repression was used as an effective political tool. What was the name of the group who spread fear in Russia? Why was this group created? This group was called the Cheka, right? They're the secret police. They're agents of repression. Why do dictatorial governments use secret police? Well, because force and violence is a very effective means in controlling people. If you want the people to just do what they're told, if you start killing a few people, they're probably going to listen. So it's pretty effective when you start chopping off heads, cutting Colombian neckties, pulling people's fingernails out, right? That would hurt a lot. Putting bamboo shoots underneath fingernails, stuff like that. So the Cheka, agents of fear and repression to cause people to just obey, to crush dissent. Now, number four, explain how the Red Terror was effective in ending revolt against Lenin and the Bolsheviks. So if you remember, the Red Terror happened once Lenin and the Bolsheviks took power. Someone tried to assassinate Lenin, right? This individual who tried to kill Lenin, they saw Lenin as a betrayal of the revolution, of the Marxist revolution, right? He wasn't living up to the, the writings of Marx. So someone tried to shoot him. They did, right? Didn't fatally wound him, but it did shoot him in the stomach. And basically this showed Lenin that there's enemies everywhere. And then the Bolsheviks engaged in a campaign of terror where they went across the nation of Russia and started eliminating anybody who they thought were potential enemies. And in the end, 50,000 people approximately were killed during the Red Terror. And look, if you're ever a dictatorial leader, let me give you a piece of advice. If you want people to do as you say, make an example of some. Right? I remember in high school, my English teacher in grade 12, I was late for my very first English class. And when teachers start sort of their first day, some teachers are a little more relaxed. Other teachers are looking to sort of like set the stage as far as, this is like my class and, I'm the big dog and all those kinds of things. So anyways, I walked into class probably 30 seconds late, right? It was a big school, didn't know where to go, and he lost his shit on me. And why? He didn't kill me, obviously, but he wanted to serve notice to the class that tardiness is unacceptable, right? So the Red Terror, sort of the same thing. It was to demonstrate that dissent was unacceptable. Now, number 5, 1918, it's actually Trotsky, right, on the authority of Lenin, signs the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, explain what this treaty did, and explain how this treaty would have increased the popularity of Lenin. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, signed in Poland between Germany and Russia, pulled Russia out of World War I. Now, why did Lenin do this? Lenin did this because he promised to bring peace, land, and bread to the nation of Russia. That's what the people wanted. That was his campaign slogan. If you ever want to be an effective politician, give the people what they want. So this is Lenin actually making good on his promise. And would it have increased his popularity? Absolutely. This was a politician who was actually doing what he said he was going to do. If you're ever a politician, right, your word is everything. So that's why Lenin did what he did. Now, number 6, explain who the Reds and Whites were when it comes to the Russian Civil War. Who helped the Whites in their effort? What was the outcome of the Civil War? So almost immediately after the October Revolution, we see Russia enter into civil war, right? So from 1917 to 1922, Russia is engaged in a civil war where Russians are killing Russians. Now, there's two belligerent groups in this war. The first group were called the Reds. The Reds were the Bolsheviks. That was the party of Lenin, right? The Red Army, as it's known as, was led by Leon Trotsky, who was Lenin's most trusted confidant. And then the other belligerent in this war was the Whites. And the Whites included people who wanted democracy in Russia, so they weren't too happy about the Constituent Assembly being banned. People who were pro-Tsar, right? They wanted the monarchy back on the throne. And then there was also Western anti-communist forces. So there were troops from America, there were troops from Great Britain, there were troops from France on the ground in Russia trying to end that civil war. Why? Well, if you watch that video about the Russian Civil War inside the PowerPoint, it's explained that the world just wasn't ready to accept communism, right? The world was very much classically liberal at this time, and communism threw that out the window. And the West wasn't ready to accept this. So they put their soldiers on the ground and tried to stop the Reds from winning the Civil War. Now, outcome of the Civil War, lots of dead Russians, right? More than World War I. And in the end, it was the Reds who win the Civil War. And this ultimately helps them create the Soviet Union and consolidate their power. Now, number 7, war communism. What was its purpose? What was it? And how could one see it as partially unsuccessful? So war communism was an economic policy that was created by Lenin and the Bolsheviks. The whole point of it was to nationalize the productive energies of the Russian economy in order to help win the Civil War. So this was nationalization to make the Reds be successful, to have the munitions they needed, to have the equipment they needed, to have the food they needed. Fed, well-armed soldiers are generally much more successful than soldiers who are not. So with that, it became a command economy, right? And that term was used before, and it's an important term for you to know here in Social 30, right? A command economy is where the government is in full command of the economy. It is the opposite of a free market, laissez-faire economy. Now, why could one see it as partially unsuccessful? It could be seen as partially unsuccessful because the kulaks rebelled against it. Rather than giving up their crops, their animals, their tools to the state, they rebelled against it. And let's skip ahead to number 9 really quickly, and then we'll go back to number 8, because from war communism we get the NEP. So because the kulaks rebelled against war communism, Lenin had a choice. Do we keep moving forward with war communism, or do we try to bring the kulaks into accepting what the Bolsheviks are trying to accomplish? And ultimately, Lenin decided that he's going to try to bring the kulaks, right? Kulak meaning capitalists, right? These rich peasant farmers. He's going to try to bring them into the fold of sort of the Bolshevik agenda. So what he did is he abandoned war communism for this thing called the NEP in 1921. And what a super creative name for a new economic policy, such as the new economic policy. Anyways, what did the NEP do? So what the NEP did is it introduced small-scale capitalism to an otherwise nationalized command economy. Now, I know it seems contradictory, and to be honest, it is. Later, the NEP was criticized by Stalin. He called it a betrayal of communist principles. But nonetheless, what it did and what it said was that as long as you met your quota to be produced, then anything above and beyond that quota, you could sell for a little bit of extra scratch. And what it ultimately did is it gave people incentive to work hard. And of course, that's the one thing that we've talked about that is always missing from a socialist or communist economy. People don't work hard when they have to work for the state. But now, under the NEP, the people are working for the state and also themselves. And that introduces motivation to the work ethic of individuals. Now, was it successful? Absolutely. It stopped Kulak rebellion and it brought them sort of on the side of the Bolsheviks. Now, number 8, going back, Nicholas II and his family were executed prior to being freed by a white military squadron. So in the context of the Russian Civil War, we have Nicholas II and his family being held by the Bolsheviks. They're trying to hide him so that he can't be captured. At one point, a white squadron is closing in on the place where Nicholas and his family are being held. And the decision was made rather hastily. You know, they felt like they couldn't get out of Ekaterinburg with the Tsar. So what they did is they took them all down to the basement and they slaughtered them. So yeah, the Tsar, the Tsarina, right, his wife, their children, their doctor, their maid, even Jimmy the dog was killed. And I guess that's because Jimmy was a threat to the throne. I guess if the dog survived, they could put him in charge. I'm not really sure what the thinking was behind shooting the dog, but that is what they did. After, of course, the execution, the bodies were dismembered, and then they dragged him to an abandoned mine shaft. If you watch the video, you know this. They doused them in sulfuric acid, and then they threw them down the mine shaft and never be found again. And from what I understand, the body of Nicholas or the bodies of Nicholas and his family were just found actually not too long ago. Where are we at here? Number 10, explain the cult of Lenin and how it was used by the next leader of the USSR. Okay, the next leader of the Soviet Union. After Lenin dies in 1922, we get Joseph Stalin. Sorry, 1924. So in 1924, Lenin dies, right? He has multiple strokes, and then he passes away. And once Lenin dies, he becomes like a mythical figure, this great father of the international proletariat, right? This guy who's going to crush the bourgeoisie. So Stalin used that idea, that imagery, to portray him as the next logical successor of the international proletariat struggle. And that sort of piggybacks with number 11, the final question here. After Lenin's death, who took power in the Soviet Union? If you remember, the PowerPoint talks about this document that was made by Lenin called Lenin's Testament. After his first stroke, Lenin knew that he was not going to recover, and he created a document called his Testament, where in that testament he very clearly warns the Bolsheviks against Stalin. He did not trust Stalin. He did not like Stalin. He did not want Stalin to be the successor of the Bolsheviks. But nonetheless, that is what happened. So number 11, it says, after Lenin's death, who took power in the USSR? The answer is Joseph Stalin. Why is this significant? Well, if you know anything about Stalin, number one, he was a bastard. Number two, he killed about 40 to 50 million of his own people to achieve the utopia that communism is always supposed to be. People like to think of as Hitler as sort of the epitome of evil, but to be perfectly honest, I don't know. I mean, Hitler was a horrible individual, but you know what? Like, for any gamers out there, Stalin had a much higher KD, right? He had a way higher kill-death ratio than did Adolf Hitler. So you could make a pretty good argument that, you know, Stalin was one of the worst individuals to ever live. Okay, that's the answer to the questions here, folks. I hope you like my new camera that I got for you guys. Full 1080p HD, nothing but the best for you. Please mash the thumbs up button underneath, click subscribe, hit that little notification bell, and you'll know every time there's new content coming out for you. Take it easy, guys. Bye.